it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. Good evening, my brave wanderers, and welcome back to the edge of the unseen. Tonight we step beyond the familiar streets and into shadows that linger where light dares not tread, a place where walls have ears and silence hides secrets far darker than the night itself. So dim the lights, pull the curtains tight, and listen closely. This evening we follow in the chilling footsteps of two urban explorers who stumble upon a secret no one was meant to find, where ordinary corridors lead to horrors lurking just beyond perception. Are you ready to witness what hides behind abandoned doors and forgotten tunnels? Then stay close. The story begins now. The Tunnel Under the Abandoned Hospital by Margot Holloway. Prologue. Ypsilanti State Hospital sits on the edge of town like a ghost the city pretends not to notice. It was built in the early 1930s by Albert Kahn, the same architect who designed numerous factories, so the place looks less like a hospital and more like a series of industrial monoliths dropped onto a manicured lawn. Once it was a self-contained ward with its own farm, chapel, massive dormitories, even a golf course. Nearly 4,000 patients lived inside its walls at the peak, along with almost 1,000 staff. It ran like a tiny closed-off city, a city where everyone was trapped. Treatments here were the kind that don't get advertised in medical brochures. Electroshock as routine therapy, needle showers that shot freezing water into the skin, ultraviolet radiation chambers, even lobotomies when the staff decided someone's brain needed to be quieter. One winter during World War II, a US Army medical team used patients to test a flu vaccine. 200 human test subjects, barely informed, barely protected. The concrete floors and tiled walls might still remember how many people begged to go home. Well, the hospital didn't disappear overnight. Its forensic ward, a place for patients too dangerous or too traumatized for regular care, kept running long after the main buildings emptied out. In the late 90s, the state finally pulled the plug, cutting funding, ending treatment, scattering the last patients into shelters, street corners, or worse. What remained was a sprawling carcass of brick and plaster, picked over by time and local kids who wanted to dare each other into the dark. For 16 years, the place sat open and rotting, with shattered windows, surgical cabinets still filled with something resembling tools, and peeling walls the color of bruises. Most people think the hospital was demolished in 2006, and mostly that's true. But rumors insist that not everything above ground was the whole story. Ypsilanti State Hospital was built with a network of underground tunnels connecting each ward, a hidden spine beneath the complex. Some were sealed off before the wrecking crews arrived. Others were supposedly buried rather than destroyed. No one has an official map. Some locals claim the tunnels still exist between the new facilities built over the land. A private company owns the site now, fenced off and somewhat guarded. That only makes the mystery stronger. For urban explorers, the hospital is irresistible. Massive, tragic, architecturally striking, and drenched in the kind of history that clings to your thoughts. Stagnant air seems to hold its own stories. People swear they hear gurneys moving in empty rooms, or see windows subtly shift when there's no wind outside. Whether that's ghost talk, bad acoustics, or the echo of things that once happened here, no one can say. But there's a reason explorers keep coming back, even if they have to sneak past gates and cameras to do it. There's also a reason why they don't always stay long. Some places hide their past in dust and decay. Ypsilanti State Hospital feels like it's still using its space, still keeping secrets. The tunnels, the locked wards, the abandoned infrastructure. They don't just invite exploration, they dare you to find what was never meant to be uncovered. A place built to confine people doesn't easily forget how. And if someone were using those forgotten corridors for something new, something modern, or who would question it? After all, nobody pays attention to an empty building on the edge of town, especially one that was built to keep its inhabitants invisible. Part 1. I glanced at my watch one last time before catching sight of William drifting toward the fence line. He wore that crooked grin he always got when we were about to cross a line we had no business crossing. 2 years of slipping through forgotten places together taught me exactly what that look meant. Ready to relive some glory days? he called as he reached the tear in the chain-link fencing wrapped around Ypsilanti State Hospital. The place loomed over us, 4 stories of abandoned medicine and dust, a rotting monument that had basically become my second address. Most people saw a corpse of a building, whereas I saw memories carved into concrete. Every smashed window, every spray-tagged wall, every orphaned piece of equipment whispered its own little confession about who'd lived, worked, or trespassed here long after the last doctor had locked up. William ducked through the gap first, camera bag bouncing against his hip. I slipped in behind him, my gear settling comfortably between my shoulders. The front entrance hung crooked on its hinges, same as always. Someone had booted it in years ago, and security had stopped pretending they cared. The moment we stepped inside, the familiar twisted warmth washed over me. The lobby sprawled out in front of us, ceiling tiles shattered underfoot like giant scraps of dead snowfall. Rust-stained equipment slumped in corners where scavengers had either lost interest or lost patience trying to haul it out. A wheelchair sat abandoned beside the reception desk, its vinyl seat cracked open like old skin. Still creeps me out, William muttered, already raising his camera for a few shots. In a good way, though. I led him down the main hallway, our flashlights carving thin tunnels through the thick, stale dark. The building's guts had been stripped bare years ago. Wiring, copper, anything worth a buck was gone. All that remained was the light we brought with us and whatever weak daylight managed to bleed through shattered panes. Hey, remember that room with the gynecological gear? I asked as I veered down a corridor that I could probably walk in my sleep. Ooh, the stirrups? Still there. William snorted and trailed after me. We passed room after room, doors hanging crooked or missing entirely. Patient rooms that once held post-op recoveries or psychiatric cases now sat hollow and echoing, haunted only by the furniture no one had bothered to steal. Empty bed frames, cabinets with their glass blown out, the leftovers of someone else's life, abandoned long before we got here. I paused at one of the rooms and swung my flashlight inside. This was the psych ward. You could tell by the reinforced glass and the heavy-duty door frames built to survive whatever hell once broke loose in here. William stepped up beside me, firing off a burst of shots, each flash slicing the darkness and freezing the room in harsh, clinical snapshots. The walls were still coated in that soul-killing institutional beige, now cracked though, stained and curling at the edges like old scabs. Someone had tagged a message across the far wall, but the beam wasn't strong enough to make out the words. We kept moving, walking our way through the first floor with a kind of ritual precision, rooms we already knew like old stories, but that William wanted to capture again. He was always the archivist between us, gathering proof, while I was the one who liked to breathe the place in and let its history hum under my skin. I wanted to feel what it had been like when people lived, fought, screamed, healed here, before everything had gone hollow. Hey, you know why I keep coming back? William said as we drifted down another dim corridor. It's like I'm checking in on an old friend. They get a little more beat up every time, but you can still recognize them. Well, he wasn't wrong. Every visit showed us new wounds, fresh graffiti, new break-ins, tiles that had surrendered to gravity. But the skeleton of the place never changed. The endless hallways with their cracked linoleum, the nurses' stations built into the walls like command posts, the patient rooms with their tiny windows and rusting fixtures. We spent close to an hour covering the first floor, William snapping photos while I filled the silence with stories. I told him about the time I'd found a forgotten patient chart still tucked in a drawer, about the explorer from Chicago who'd wandered around lost for 3 hours because he thought my advice was optional, about the homeless guy who'd been sleeping here for weeks until security finally dragged him back out into the cold. At night, the building shifted. Well, it didn't get scarier, just more personal. Our flashlights carved out little islands of vision surrounded by a sea of shadow, turning each room into a separate world. The quiet wrapped around us, thick and total, broken only by our footsteps and the occasional groan deep in the structure as the hospital settled into itself like something old trying to get comfortable again. Hey, you want to see something that always rattles the fresh meat? I asked William as we wrapped up the last room on the first floor. He raised an eyebrow. Hit me. What do you got? I tilted my flashlight toward the far end of the hall, toward the stairwell swallowed in shadow. Yeah, the morgue. Down in the basement. Everybody thinks they're ready for it, right up until we're standing under a few tons of concrete with no sunlight and nowhere to run. William tightened the strap on his camera bag and nodded. Lead on. I trust your instincts when it comes to the creepy stuff. The stairwell door hung half open, breathing out a darkness that felt thick enough to touch. I pulled it wider and tested the first step, pressing down before shifting my weight fully onto it. The stairs were solid, old-school construction, meant to survive whatever apocalypse the rest of the building couldn't. Right, stick close, I said as we started down. Basement's its own beast. The concrete steps ended at a heavy metal door that groaned open with the same miserable, familiar scream it always made. Crossing that threshold felt like slipping into another world entirely. The temperature dropped fast, 10 degrees at least. The air carried that deep, wet chill of underground places nobody has bothered to care about in decades. My flashlight cut across the corridor, mapping out the blueprint I'd memorized long ago. The basement stretched out both ways, lined with rooms that once held supplies, boilers, paperwork, now just hollow shells. Scavengers had picked it cleaner than a carcass in the desert. Right, this way, I said, turning left. Record storage first. Morgue's past that. We passed door after door, each leading into barren concrete boxes with rusting metal shelves. William paused at one, raised his camera, and the flash popped, revealing rows of empty filing cabinets slumped against the walls like gutted beasts. Man, they really stripped this place, he muttered, scrolling through the shot. Yeah, records got moved out when they shut the place down, I said. Everything else just got stolen, smashed, or forgotten. I kept moving, our footfalls echoing off the stone concrete. Down here, the corridors were tighter, utilitarian with no frills. Pipes and conduits ran overhead in tangled bundles. Most had been stripped of copper long ago by someone desperate enough to risk the dark. The morgue sat in a corner of the basement, tucked behind double doors that had lost their glass ages back. I pushed through first, my flashlight slicing open the gloom to reveal a space I'd shown at least a dozen explorers over the past couple of years. Some were fascinated, some terrified, all changed just a little by what they saw next. The room was bigger than most people ever imagined, maybe 20 by 15 feet, boxed in by concrete walls painted a sickly white that had aged into a nicotine yellow haze. 3 metal examination tables sat bolted in a neat row, heavy enough to outlive the rest of the hospital. Their surfaces were scratched up, stained, beaten, but they were still there, too stubborn and too firmly anchored for scavengers to bother with. Along one wall, old drainage lines and rusted plumbing fixtures marked where the real machinery had once lived. William circled the tables slowly, firing off shots from every angle. Each flash carved jagged shadows across the walls, making the place look far more dramatic in bursts of light than it did under my steady flashlight. "Oh, these are legit," he said, dragging his fingers along the cold edge of a table. Stainless steel, built like they expected the apocalypse. Everything else got looted. Fridge units, scales, all the gear. But these, no one's hauling these monsters out. I drifted toward the far end of the room then. The cabinets once held tools, meds, paperwork, whatever they needed right before a body was sealed up or wheeled out. Most of the cabinet doors were hanging by a hinge or were long gone, leaving open shelves dotted with the occasional forgotten scrap. A few surgical tools they'd scattered inside, too corroded to use, too worthless to steal. William worked the room with his usual precision, broad shots to map the space, tighter ones to capture the important scars, close-ups of anything that whispered a story. I'd seen him do this in dozens of ruins, always with the same methodical patience. "Hey, you know what's strange?" he said, lowering his camera. "This room, it's not as creepy as I expected. I mean, yeah, it's a morgue, but it feels hollow, like whatever made it scary packed up and left." "Oh, that's because it did," I said. This place has personality, sure, but death? No, death doesn't linger. Only the bones of the building stay behind. We stuck around another 10 minutes while William wrapped up. I used the time to poke through corners I'd skimmed in past visits, checking for anything new, anything the dark might have coughed up since the last time I was here. Well, the morgue rarely changed, but abandoned places do have a way of surprising you when you get complacent. William was zipping up his camera bag when we heard it. A scrape. Soft, but sharp enough to freeze us where we stood. We held still, listening. It came again, a drag across concrete, or metal kissing stone. Just a second, maybe two, and then nothing. The silence rushed back in, thick enough for us to choke on. Hey, other explorers? William whispered, barely breathing the words. Yeah, probably. This place gets traffic, especially weekends. Or maybe it was, but the sound gnawed at me. It wasn't the chaotic clatter of bored teens or the careless blunder of weekend thrill-seekers. No, it had intention behind it. It was slow, measured, like someone dragging something with purpose. Most explorers moved like they were invincible, stomping around and talking loudly because they thought the dark was empty. Hey, should we check it out? William asked. I held still listening. The basement had corridors I'd never bothered with, mostly utility wings that didn't offer much except rust and machinery guts. But if someone was down here, maybe they knew more than I did. Maybe they'd found the cracks that I'd missed. Yeah, I said finally. Let's see who we're sharing the dark with. We stepped out of the morgue and headed toward the main corridor. The noise had come from the right. A hallway I'd walked past dozens of times but never explored because it looked like it dead-ended 50 feet in. My flashlight carved a thin path as we turned. The walls were the same cold concrete as the rest of the basement, but something about this stretch felt removed, more bunker than hospital. Very few doors, long stretches of blank wall, built for machines, not people. We passed 2 cramped rooms stuffed with the corpses of old mechanical systems, boiler hookups, stripped electrical panels, dead pipes leading nowhere, infrastructure guts, leftovers from when this place had a heartbeat. Well, the hall went farther than I'd expected. What looked like a dead end from the main corridor actually curved right, slipping deeper under the hospital footprint. The scraping sound came again, clearer this time and dead ahead. William drifted closer to me, and I heard the shift in his breathing. Well, not panic, just his body deciding it should probably wake up. The corridor ended at a heavy door with storage stenciled across it in fading black letters. The door was cracked open, 6 inches of darkness leaking out. Strange I'd never registered it before. I mean, I'd been down here enough times to know every bolt by heart. I stepped forward and nudged the door wider. Our beam swept across a cramped concrete chamber, maybe 8 feet by 10. Smaller than the other basement rooms. Forgotten, boxed in, unnoticed. Old equipment littered the floor, not the valuable stuff. Nobody had bothered with that long ago. No, this was scrap. Broken wheelchairs collapsed like dead insects. Monitoring gear half gutted. Cardboard boxes long rotted into mush by damp air. William stepped up beside me, his light locking with mine. Nothing here was worth taking. Nothing here explained that sound either. But something had definitely been down here. I was about to tell William we should head out when my flashlight skimmed over something in the far corner, something that didn't match the rest of the room's wreckage. Buried under a heap of hospital gowns and shredded privacy curtains, the floor had a patch that looked wrong. Very smooth, too intentional. I crossed the room and yanked the fabric aside. Underneath was wood, a square section of it maybe 3 feet by 3, set clearly into the concrete like a missing piece of a puzzle. Metal hinges lined one side, a recessed handle carved into the other. "Hey, Darren." William's voice had an edge to it now. "What the hell is that?" I knelt, sweeping away the rest of the debris. The wood was old but solid, not warped or rotted in any way. The hinges were the real surprise. No rust, no flaking metal. They looked used, maintained even. I don't know, I said, running my fingers along the seam where wood met concrete. I've been down here more times than I can count. Never seen this, not once. The fit was flawless, professional even. This wasn't some DIY hideout put together by squatters or bored teens. It was part of the original structure, purposefully hidden. Someone had recently uncovered it. Part 2. William lowered himself into a crouch beside me, angling his light toward the hinges. Hey, should we open it? That old electric mixture, curiosity twisted with caution, flared in my stomach. 2 years in Ypsilanti stayed, and I thought I'd squeezed every secret out of it. But now it felt like I'd found a hidden door in my own living room. I hooked my fingers onto the recessed handle and pulled. The trapdoor lifted like it had been greased yesterday. No resistance, no shriek of old metal, just a smooth rise, revealing a square mouth of darkness that dropped into what looked like a tunnel. My flashlight punched down into it, 6 feet maybe, then the passage curved away. The opening was just wide enough for a person to slip into. Concrete walls continued downward, the craftsmanship too clean now, too intentional to be anything improvised. Hey, this is not normal hospital construction, I said, leaning over the edge. William aimed his beam beside mine. Where do you think it leads? No clue. Could have tied into steam tunnels, maybe some forgotten maintenance corridor. But even as the words came out of my mouth, I knew they were wrong. Steam tunnels always had pipes, valves, something. Maintenance shafts had wiring or utility lines. This passage was built for one thing: people moving through it. Nothing else. I swung my legs over the edge and dropped down. The tunnel was taller than it looked, perhaps 4 feet high. Not a crawl space exactly, but close. Enough room to move, but not enough to breathe easy. The floor itself was smooth concrete. The walls, too. Whoever had built this did it right. Darren, William called from above. Maybe we should, think about this. It's fine, I said, looking ahead into the dark curve of the tunnel. I'm not going far. I just want to see where it starts. Hey, stay close. The truth was, I needed to know where this tunnel went, how deep it ran, what it touched, who built it, and why it had been hidden under a place I thought I already understood. Stumbling onto something this big, this secret in a building I'd crawled through for years, felt like finding a locked room in your own house that you somehow had never noticed. William slid down after me, hitting the floor with all the energy of a man who already regretted his life choices. His camera bag scraped along the concrete like it was protesting the trip as much as he was. Yeah, this wasn't built with customer comfort in mind, he muttered, trying to wriggle into position. I started crawling, letting my flashlight cut a thin silver lane through the dark. The tunnel ran straight for about 10 feet before sweeping off to the right. All the walls were smooth, the concrete polished in that expensive institutional way. No cheap shortcuts, no amateur handiwork. Someone had poured serious money into this passage, and they didn't want just anyone finding it. William crawled behind me, his breath tight and uneven thanks to the cramped space and the weight of all the gear strapped to him. The tunnel forced us into a single-file march, and the sounds of our elbows and knees scraping along the floor bounced forward into the dark like something was racing ahead to warn whatever was waiting. After a few long minutes, my knees were burning and the concrete felt like it was chewing through my jeans. That's when the floor began to tilt upward. It was subtle at first, then more noticeable. A slow climb that said we were heading toward another part of the property, or another building entirely. Hey, how far do you actually want to go? William asked, strained and annoyed at this point. Just a little more. We're moving up. Feels like we're getting close to ground level. So we pushed on, another 50 feet or so, the incline still rising. Then everything changed. I felt it before the flashlight caught up to it. The echo had vanished, the air shifted, no longer boxed in by tight walls. The space opened. My light washed over a small chamber, 6 by 6 maybe. The walls weren't concrete anymore, but rough wooden planks. And above us, almost blending into the ceiling, a ladder made of wooden rungs stretched up toward another trapdoor. This part wasn't built by the same hands that had carved the tunnel. This felt older, cheaper, something thrown together like a shed or a storage hut. I went first. Each rung groaned under me, but the wood was sturdier than it looked. It was kept up, not neglected. When I reached the top, I pressed my palms against the trapdoor. Well, it lifted almost too easily, as if someone opened it often, or expected it to be used. A thin slice of darkness waited above. I shoved it wider and pulled myself through, crawling up into a small wooden structure. My flashlight swept the room, catching rough-cut plank walls, slanted roof, and a dirt floor scattered with old tools and forgotten supplies. Like someone had stepped out for a minute and just never came back. William hauled himself up after me, and for the first time since we crawled into that concrete throat of a tunnel, we could stand, well, almost. The ceiling sagged low, forcing us to hunch like intruders in someone else's nightmare. "Where the hell are we?" he murmured, eyes flicking around the cramped wooden box we'd surfaced into. I stepped over to a makeshift window, just a sheet of plywood slapped over an opening, and peeked through a crack between the boards. Nothing but trees. Endless, silent black pines swallowing the shed from every direction. No lights, no roads, no sign of the hospital. Somewhere in the woods behind the main property," I whispered. "The tunnel must have dragged us a couple of 100 yards at least." Inside the shed, the gear didn't match the vibe of an abandoned outbuilding. Against one wall, there were rolled-up sleeping bags, a pair of grimy camping chairs, a collapsible table. Shelves made from stacked crates that held canned food, and jugs of water were lined up in a neat little army. This wasn't trash left behind. This was a setup. Someone lived here, recently and often. But the real punch in the gut sat on the folding table in the center. Electronics. Not hobbyist junk. This was real equipment. Radios, battery packs, compact monitors, cameras, coils of cable feeding into a car battery humming softly in the corner. The kind of gear that meant planning, intention, and surveillance. William already had his camera out, snapping shots like we had all the time in the world. His flash tore jagged shadows across the wooden panels. "God, this is pro stuff," he muttered. "No way this is just some squatters keeping warm." I leaned over the monitors. One screen glowed a sickly green, that familiar night vision haze. The angle threw me for a second, until it clicked. Ypsilanti State Hospital. They were watching it, watching us, watching everyone. "God, they've been monitoring the place," I said, tapping the screen. "Look, parking lot, and the fence gap we came through. Anyone using this setup would know the second someone stepped inside." William shifted closer then, staring at the feed. His face tightened. I turned toward another monitor, then froze. Voices. Outside. Men's voices, more than one, getting closer. William met my eyes, and we both knew instantly we'd just stepped into someone else's operation. I grabbed his arm and pointed at the trap door. We didn't speak, we didn't breathe, we just moved. We dropped down into the chamber below, landing as softly as we could on the cold floor. I eased the trap door down, but kept a slither, a thin, 1-inch window into whatever was about to walk in above us. The voices sharpened. Boots were thudding, 4 of them judging by how the footsteps split and reconverged. Flashlights flicked on, beams slicing through the shed, their shifting shadows leaking through the crack and twitching across my face like warning signs. We crouched in the dark beneath them, our hearts hammering, dust floating in the thin light from above. And all I could think was, we were never meant to find this place. "Yeah, check the monitors," one of them ordered, a gravelly voice with the kind of authority people don't question. I heard someone move toward the surveillance table. Buttons clicked, switches snapped, the low hum from the electronics thickened, rising like the whole rig was waking up, stretching and listening. "Everything's clear," another man reported. "No movement at the hospital since those 2 kids went in around 9. My stomach went ice cold. God, they'd seen us go in. They tracked us from the moment we slipped through the fence. Every step, every room, every whisper. We'd never been alone. William shifted beside me. The 2 of us crammed into that coffin-sized space under the shed, trying not to make a sound. I could feel the tension coming off him like heat. The ladder dug into my spine as I stayed pressed against the wall, barely breathing. The maps are still here," the third voice said. Pages rustled then. Thick paper, big sheets. "Road through Detroit looks good for tomorrow. Timing should work if we keep the schedule." Detroit. Street names I knew, places I'd driven past 100 times. Now they were checkpoints in whatever operation this was, waypoints on a map of something I didn't want to understand. "What about the pickup?" the leader asked. "Confirmed for 6 a.m. We'll have about an hour before traffic picks up." Well, they kept talking. More times, more locations, pieces of a logistics puzzle that reeked of planning and precision. Not amateurs, not vandals, not drug dealers hiding out. This was something bigger, something meticulously organized. And then another noise, this one from outside. A vehicle, tires crunching over dead leaves, and the engine cut. Car doors slammed hard enough to rattle the shed walls. "Hey, we're here," someone shouted. "Got the package." Package. That word landed wrong. Extremely casual. Often practiced. My pulse spiked. I pressed my eye to the sliver of light at the trap door, willing myself not to blink. 2 men stepped inside, breathing hard. Between them, they dragged a young woman. She wasn't resisting. She couldn't. Her head hung forward, her hair hiding most of her face. Her arms dangled uselessly. Her feet scraped the dirt floor as they pulled her deeper into the shed, like she was a load they were tired of carrying. My throat tightened so violently I almost made a sound. Whoever she was, whatever this operation was, we were in the middle of something far worse than a hidden tunnel or a creepy surveillance shack. We were trapped underneath it. Her clothes were ripped in places, fabric hanging like claw marks, and her hands were clinched behind her back with zip ties, tight enough that I could see the skin swelling around the plastic. "Hey, she giving you any trouble?" one of the older guys asked, the one who sounded like he commanded the room without even trying. "Nah," the newcomer replied. "She's been out most of the ride. Gave her something a couple of hours ago." The woman's head lifted, barely. In the sweep of their flashlights, her face appeared. Young, early 20s at most, dark hair plastered to her cheeks. Her eyes fluttered, unfocused, struggling to stay open like she was clawing her way through some thick fog. "Buyers confirmed for Toledo?" the leader asked. "Yep, they're expecting delivery tomorrow afternoon. Price is what we agreed." William's hand clamped around my wrist so hard it felt like bone grinding. Buyers? Oh, that word hit like a blow. There was no misunderstanding this, no stretching it into something less monstrous. We were listening to men casually discussing selling a human being. One of the guys stepped away, pulling out a phone. He didn't bother lowering his voice. "Hey, it's me," he said. "Package is ready for transport. We'll leave around 5 in the morning. Should have it to you by noon. Yep, same condition as discussed. No issues with pickup." Package. Again, like she wasn't even a person. The woman stirred, lifting her head with the last scraps of strength she had left. The sound slipped out of her, thin, shaky, almost a whisper. But the sound sliced through the room. "Ah, shit, she's coming around again," one of them said. I watched, frozen and shaking, as another guy dug into a duffel and pulled out a preloaded syringe. He tapped the needle just like a nurse preparing a flu shot. There was nothing routine about the look in his eyes, nothing humane about the way he approached her. The woman saw the needle and tried to pull away. Her movements were sloppy, desperate, and terrified, the body trying to save itself even when the mind was drowning. "Right, hold her," the man said calmly. Two of them pinned her arms. A third forced the needle into her upper arm. Her breath hitched. Within seconds, her body sagged, her head dropping like the strings had been cut. "That'll keep her quiet till we get there," he said, tossing the empty syringe back into the bag like it was trash. I had to shut my eyes, force air into my lungs before the panic swallowed me. The way they'd handled her, as cargo, as inventory, made something twist in my gut hard enough to make me nauseous. William's grip tightened until my fingers went numb. His breathing had gone uneven, bordering on panic now. They stayed another 20 minutes, going over their plans in cold, methodical detail. Routes through the city, alternate drop points, names and numbers of people helping coordinate whatever this network was. Their voices always steady, their movements efficient. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't improvised crime. This was a system. When they carried the unconscious woman back to their vehicle like she weighed nothing, any last bit of denial evaporated. We had just watched a human trafficking operation in motion. We were still trapped underneath the shed. Part 3. They hauled her between them like dead weight, like she was nothing more than a busted sofa they were tired of carrying. No care, no hesitation, just two men trading small talk about traffic and delivery schedules while treating a living woman like she'd already been reduced to product. Engines kicked over outside, a staggered roar that faded into the distance, leaving the shed choking on silence, just the low, insect-like whir of surveillance rigs working overtime. William and I stayed underground, frozen in that cramped chamber, both of us replaying what we'd just seen like a corrupted tape we couldn't shut off. When I finally shoved the trapdoor wider and dragged myself back into the shed, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Everything looked the same, the camping gear, the maps, the blinking monitors. But now the whole place felt poisoned. I knew what these tools were really for. William climbed up after me. The flashlight sliced across his face and drained it pale. "Darren," he breathed, his voice tight and shredded. "We have to call the police." I nodded because my throat wouldn't cooperate. Whatever game we thought we were playing, urban exploration, trespassing, chasing a thrill, well, it had just bled out in front of us. We'd walked straight into a human trafficking pipeline. Somewhere out there, that girl was being carted toward people who thought they owned her. "We need to move," I said, dropping back into the chamber. "Now." William was already crouched by the tunnel mouth, arms tight around his camera bag like a life raft. We didn't waste breath talking, we just crawled. The tunnel that had felt like some cool, forgotten secret half an hour ago now felt like a coffin stretching into forever. Oh, every scrape of my knees, every clatter of William's gear sounded explosive in the cramped dark. My shoulders burned, my knees screamed. I didn't care though, I just needed out, needed concrete and dirt and time between us and that shed. William's breathing kept pace with mine, shallow, rapid, and scared. The tunnel looked left, then slanted downward toward the hospital basement. I knew the route in theory, but the familiar turns felt warped somehow, elongated and wrong. My flashlight beam jittered over the smooth concrete walls, turning the whole place hostile. When we finally hit the chamber beneath the storage room, I didn't bother testing the ladder. I grabbed the first rung and hauled myself up like something was right behind me. Getting out of that tunnel beat every other concern then. Caution, silence and stealth, none of that mattered anymore. I climbed fast, dragging myself up the last stretch, and William scrambled after me, both of us erupting into the storage room like we'd been spat out of the earth itself. We were panting, our clothes were smeared with dust, and our lungs were burning. But I didn't wait. I cut straight through the basement corridors, past the morgue, past the records room, past the mechanical guts of the building, moving just shy of a full sprint. Earlier, these spaces had been curiosities, echoes of old architecture and forgotten routines. Now they were just dead ground between us and daylight. The stairwell to the main floor looked like salvation. We bolted up the steps 2 at a time, slammed through the metal door, and made a beeline for the lobby without even glancing at the rooms we normally wandered through like locals in our own private kingdom. Broken ceiling tiles crunched and skittered under our boots. The wheelchair tipped near reception, the dust-coated equipment shoved into the corners. Everything was frozen exactly how we'd left it. And yet the building itself felt hostile now, like it had shut its jaws behind us. For 2 years we'd treated this place like a second home, but tonight it felt like it wanted us gone. We pushed through the main entrance and cut across the parking lot toward the break in the fence. Cold night air slammed into my face. It was the first real breath I'd taken since hearing those men outside the shed. But even outside the hospital grounds, we didn't slow down. William's car sat exactly where we'd abandoned it, perfectly ordinary under the distant streetlights, as if nothing in the world had changed. I yanked out my phone with hands that still wouldn't steady and punched in 911. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report human trafficking, I said. Somehow my voice came out flat and almost solid. We just saw a woman being transported. She's being kidnapped. A beat of silence and then, Sir, what's your location? I gave her Ypsilanti State Hospital and forced the story out. The tunnel, the shed, the cameras, the way they drugged her right in front of us. As I talked, her tone shifted, tightened, like she was trying to fit the pieces together without showing it. Sir, you said you were inside an abandoned hospital building. Yeah, but that's not the point. They had a woman. She was unconscious, restrained. Like they were talking to buyers, deliveries and stuff. Look, it's real. More typing then, the sound of keys firing rapidly. Are you and your companion safe right now? Yes, I said. We're outside in a car. Officers are being dispatched to your location, she replied. Stay where you are. Do not go back inside. I hung up and turned toward William. He had both hands locked around the steering wheel, his knuckles pale, his eyes fixed on the hospital like he was waiting for it to move. His camera bag sat wedged between his boots, dusty and battered. Then it hit me. He dragged that thing through the entire tunnel without a single complaint. Pure adrenaline, I guess. Pure survival. How long do you think they'll take? He asked, his voice low. No idea, I said. Hopefully fast. Silence settled in, thick and heavy. And we just sat there, letting the reality of what we'd seen grind its way through our skulls. The parking lot was dead quiet except for the soft hiss of distant traffic. The hospital loomed in front of us, just a carcass on the surface, giving no hint of the horror machine humming under its skin. Then headlights cut through the dark. One set, then 2 more. 3 cruisers rolled in, beams slicing across the cracked asphalt and casting shadows across the trash and rubble. A woman in plain clothes stepped out of the lead car, moving with the kind of confidence people don't fake. Her hair was pulled tight back, her posture was sharp, and she meant business. I rolled down the window as she approached. Hi, I'm Detective Sullivan, she said. You're the one who called about human trafficking? Yes, I said. Darren Wilson. This is William Smith. She looked us over, measuring us up, trying to decide if we were legit or if we'd just scared ourselves with ghost stories in an abandoned building. Right. I need you to tell me exactly what you saw, she said, and where. But first, are either of you hurt? In danger? No, I said. But Detective, what we saw was real. They had a woman, drugged, unconscious. They were talking about buyers like she was inventory. Her expression darkened then, going from standard procedure to something sharper and colder. Right, I'm going to need you to take me to this tunnel, she said, and to the exact spot where this occurred. Can you go back inside with us? Well, William and I traded a look. Everything in me screamed no. I didn't want to see that basement again, didn't want to feel that tunnel closing in around me. She needed proof. She needed the route. She needed us. Yes, I said finally. We can show you. Sullivan gave orders to the uniformed officers, quiet, clipped commands. One cop popped open a trunk, pulling out extra flashlights and gear that definitely wasn't standard patrol issue. "Okay, follow me," she said. We went back the way we'd come, through the fence gap across the dead lot into the hollowed-out lobby. But this time we weren't alone. Flashlight beams carved through the dark, and boots echoed off the tile. The police officers moved with purpose. And then the building felt even more dangerous with all that silence broken. The path we knew by heart felt warped now, like we were walking through a bad dream with badges on our backs. What had once been our secret playground was suddenly a crime scene, every shadow and rusted doorway part of an official sweep. Down in the basement, I brought Detective Sullivan straight to the storage room and showed her the trap door. Same rough wood, same metal hinges, all of it looking too well kept for a place that was supposed to be abandoned. She ran her fingers along the edges, studying the fresh scratches, the clean pivot of the hinge. "You crawled through this?" she asked. "To another building?" "Yeah," I said. "It comes out to a shed in the woods. That's where we saw everything." Sullivan keyed her radio, calling in backup. More units, and from the tone, a tactical response team. Then she pressed us for every detail. The tunnel's twists, the length, the ladder, the shed layout, the equipment, the girl. We recounted everything we could remember. "Right, I need both of you outside," she said finally. "Officers will take you to a patrol car. Stay put. I'll talk to you again once the scene is secure." 2 uniformed cops escorted us back through the hospital. The place felt even more haunted on the way out. They loaded us into the back of a cruiser, cold plastic seats meant for cuffs and suspects, but after what we'd crawled through, even that felt like shelter. From inside the car, we watched the cavalry arrive. More cruisers, unmarked vehicles, officers heading into the hospital, others vanishing into the tree line behind the property to circle the shed from above ground. Floodlights flickered between branches, radios crackled. The whole place was waking up. William sat stiff beside me, quiet for most of the time. Eventually he looked over, his eyes dark and restless. "Hey, you think they'll find them?" "Well, I hope so," I said. "But even if they've already run, it's out in the open now. Nobody can pretend this place is empty anymore." 1 a.m. had already slipped past when Detective Sullivan came back. She looked worn down, but not surprised, more like someone who found proof of a nightmare she already believed was real. "We located the shed," she said, pulling the car door open. "Everything matches your account. The monitors, the camping gear, the maps. Recent activity, clear signs of occupation. The area's secured for forensics." Relief hit me so hard my breath caught. For 2 hours I'd been wrestling with the idea that maybe we'd misread everything. Maybe panic had twisted something mundane into something monstrous. But no, it was real, all of it. "What now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "you both come with me to the station and give full statements. This is going to be a complicated case, and your testimony is going to matter." I barely slept afterward. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw the woman's slack face, heard those men talking about her like she was freight on a schedule. The kind of thing you don't unhear. The kind that doesn't let you go. William swung by at 8 sharp, and the drive into downtown Detroit passed in a kind of numb silence. Neither of us felt like talking. The city moved around us. Traffic, sirens, morning noise. But it all felt distant, like we were sealed inside our own private fallout zone. The police station sat on a busy corner, a hulking block of old brick that looked like it had been absorbing confessions and crime scenes since the Cold War. Inside, Detective Sullivan was waiting. She didn't waste time, just nodded, turned, and led us through a labyrinth of beige hallways that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. She brought us into a third-floor conference room that was smaller than I expected. Rectangular table, chairs designed by someone who hated the human spine, and a wall of recording gear humming quietly. A thick folder lay open in front of her, stuffed with documents, photos, notes, evidence she'd already begun stitching into something coherent. "I'm going to record everything," she said, adjusting the audio setup. "Take your time. Even the details you think are useless can end up being the thing that cracks a case. Well, it took hours, longer than I'd guessed. She had us walk through the entire night step by step, from the moment we parked at the hospital to the second I called 911. But she kept stopping us. What were their exact words? How tall was the man with the jacket? Which direction did he turn? Where was William standing when the woman was carried past? Every question pulled something loose from the back of my mind, things I hadn't consciously remembered. One man had a slight limp. One reeked of cigarettes. The gravel outside had crackled under their tires when they rolled in. William chimed in with his own details, camera models he recognized on the shelves, the types of monitors on the folding table, the brand of radio equipment. Professional-grade surveillance, Sullivan muttered, making quick notes. This isn't some small-time setup. It's part of a larger network. Your hospital? It's been a waypoint. She explained it in that same calm, clinical tone. The shed's equipment had likely been watching the hospital for months, tracking urban explorers, trespassers, anyone who might stumble into the wrong hallway. The traffickers needed a clear window. They needed silence, emptiness. They needed to make sure no one saw them using the tunnel. That's why you never crossed paths with them before, she said. They were watching your habits, your timing. They knew when you showed up, where you liked to go, how long you stayed. The thought hit hard, colder than anything I'd felt the night before. All these times William and I had wandered the hospital thinking we were the only ones inside. Someone out in the trees had been tracking us, logging our movements, studying them. Outside the room, we could hear radios clicking on and off as officers moved around the building. Sullivan told us forensic teams were still working the shed and tunnel, pulling DNA, dusting for prints, bagging anything that might tie these ghosts to real names, real charges, real consequences. Well, it felt bigger than anything we'd ever stumbled into before. Bigger and darker, and way too real. Detective Sullivan flipped through her notes, her expression tightening as she spoke. The tunnel, she said, wasn't the work of some sloppy crew improvising with spare parts. It showed a lot of planning and money, an operation with engineers, schedules, and people who knew exactly what they were doing. Well, we're looping in the FBI's trafficking unit, she added. This kind of setup usually crosses state lines. Once that happens, it's federal. 2 hours in, she opened a thicker section of her folder and slid several photographs across the table. The paper was worn at the edges, handled too many times. Missing persons, she said. Michigan and Ohio, last 18 months. She spread the photos out like cards in a rigged game. Now, look closely. Tell me if any of these women match the one you saw. God, the faces were young. Late teens, early 20s. Smiling selfies, family trip snapshots, birthday photos. All of them frozen in moments before their lives had gone off a cliff. I forced myself to look at each one carefully, replaying the memory of the woman slumped in those men's arms, her head hanging, her hair falling forward. Then I stopped. Dark hair, familiar bone structure, a face that stirred something ugly in my gut. This one, I said, tapping the photo. I think that's her. Sullivan lifted it, checked the handwriting on the back. Sarah Thompson, 22, missing from downtown Detroit, 3 weeks ago, last seen walking home after her shift. This confirmation landed like a punch. There was a name, a timeline, a life. Suddenly she wasn't just a faceless victim being carried like freight. She was someone with a family calling the police every day, begging for updates. Sullivan slid the photo back into the folder. Her parents haven't stopped reaching out. This is the first real lead we've had. William leaned forward for the first time in a while now, his voice low and strained. You think you can find her? They said something about Toledo and a noon delivery. We're already coordinating with Ohio, Sullivan said. That timestamp gives us something to work with, and there are known trafficking routes between here and Toledo. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't promise miracles. But there was movement in her tone, urgency and purpose. Then she looked at both of us, her voice dropping. You need to understand. Your testimony is now a key piece of this investigation. If we make arrests, you will be called in. We both nodded. Stay away from that hospital, she added. These people know their operation was exposed now. They may come back to destroy evidence or figure out who reported them. I don't want either of you anywhere near that place until we have suspects in custody. Part 4. Well, the warning made sense, sure, but just felt unreal. Being barred from a place that had basically been like a second home for 2 straight years. That hospital had gone from our favorite haunt, a playground for people like us, to the focal point of a full-blown criminal investigation, all because we followed a noise in the basement like idiots chasing a ghost. Before we stepped out of the station, Detective Sullivan pressed a business card into my hand. Her personal number was scrawled across the back in sharp, deliberate strokes. Call me the second anything surfaces in your memory, she said. Doesn't matter how small, it's the tiny things that blow cases open. I slid the card into my wallet and tailed William toward the exit. The lobby roared with the constant churn of police life. Uniforms moving in and out, people shouting reports, lawyers hissing into phones. All that noise had been happening while we spent 3 hours retelling one of the worst scenes I'd ever forced myself to remember. Outside, we hovered by William's car without getting in. The morning sky had gone heavy and grey now, and downtown Detroit was waking up like nothing was wrong. Commuters grabbing coffee, traffic snarling, office lights flicking on. Everything looked painfully normal, and that normalcy felt obscene after a morning spent talking about human trafficking and missing people. God, I keep thinking about her parents, William muttered as he unlocked the doors. Calling every damn day for 3 weeks, not knowing where she is. I just nodded. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound wrong. Part of me felt good, though, relieved, that we'd stepped up and reported it. But another part felt crushed under the weight of what we'd wandered into. Urban exploration wasn't supposed to lead to this. We hunted forgotten rooms, dead factories, places time had already buried. Not active crime scenes. Not networks built on hunting people. Sullivan had told us our accidental discovery might be the break they needed to tear down a trafficking ring that stretched far beyond Detroit. But sitting in William's car, staring at the dash, all I could picture was Sarah Thompson's photo, and the stupid, fragile hope that maybe, somehow, speaking up might bring her back alive. 2 days later, I was halfway through a bowl of cereal when my phone lit up. Detective Sullivan. My stomach knotted instantly. I'd been checking that phone like it owed me something ever since we left the station. Darren, this is Detective Sullivan. Do you have a few minutes? Yeah, absolutely. Did you find anything? Well, we found more than we expected, she said, papers shuffling behind her voice. Now here's the good news. We arrested 3 men last night connected with the operation. We matched cell records from around the hospital with footage from nearby businesses. My hand froze. I set the spoon down, grabbed a pen without even knowing why. Relief hit fast and sharp, but the edge in her voice told me the story wasn't about to get lighter. The men you saw in the shed are part of a larger network, she continued. They've been using abandoned buildings all over Michigan and Ohio as transit points. The hospital was just one stop in a long chain. They pick places where they can see everyone coming, where no one asks questions. She paused and then added, The investigation's expanded. Federal agents are involved now. This isn't local anymore. The operation had apparently been running for over 2 years, long enough for dozens of victims to be funneled through their system like cargo. Suddenly the whole setup made sense. The reinforced tunnels, the precision-cut walls, the weirdly professional construction. These people hadn't been improvising. No, they'd built an underground transit line engineered for speed and silence. Oh, and, we found Sarah Thompson, Sullivan said. Something twisted hard in my chest. She's alive, Darren. We pulled her out of a warehouse outside Toledo, the exact drop point you overheard them talking about. Well, I dropped into the nearest chair as if my legs forgot how to work. For 2 days I've been trying not to imagine the worst, trying not to picture Sarah slipping through our fingers because we were too late. Hearing she was alive cracked something open inside me, a pressure I didn't even realize I'd been holding. Is she okay? Well, she's in rough shape, Sullivan said, but she's getting medical care. Listen, cases like this, there's usually a long road back. Physical damage, psychological trauma. But she's awake, talking. She's helping us. Well, she kept going, unfolding the scale of what we'd stumbled into. The tunnel we'd crawled through? That was nothing. It branched into storm drains which fed into a string of safe houses across the region, hidden arteries used to move people across state lines without ever touching the surface. Federal agents were piecing it all together now, mapping every inch. Oh, the FBI has taken point, Sullivan said. Multi-state operations fall under their jurisdiction, and their trafficking units know what they're doing. I asked about William, whether he knew yet, whether they'd contacted him. Yeah, they'll need both of you, she said. Preliminary hearings, statements. Your first-hand observations are critical. What you saw in that shed ties the whole timeline together. Without your report, we wouldn't even know this network existed. These men covered their tracks too well for ordinary investigative work. Well, her words didn't stop the guilt. If anything, it rose sharper. I told her I kept thinking about those 2 years, about how many victims had passed under our feet while William and I were screwing around in the hospital ruins, oblivious. Darren, listen, she said, her tone softening now, losing its professional edge. You can't blame yourself for not seeing something that was built to stay invisible. They designed the system to disappear, but you saw it anyway. You reported it, and that changed everything. Listen, you didn't cause this, you stopped it. She added that evidence pulled from the shed along with what we'd told them had already led to more identifications, more victims, more arrests in Ohio and even Pennsylvania. The network was unraveling, and somehow, unbelievably, we were the ones who'd yanked the first thread. The maps we'd seen the traffickers poring over, the one spread out on that grimy table in the shed, turned out to be gold for the investigators. They pointed straight to other safe houses, transit routes, drop points. How many more victims? I asked. 7 confirmed so far, Sullivan said, but the circle keeps widening. Every scrap of evidence drags up another location, another arrest. Oh, the hospital. That place that had felt like ours was now under full lockdown. Cops on every corner, unmarked cars parked like wolves waiting in the dark. Forensics teams were tearing through every corridor William and I had walked in, every room we'd photographed, every shadow we'd crawled through. This place wasn't a playground anymore. It was a harvest site for evidence. We're finding signs the basement storage room wasn't just a tunnel access, Sullivan said. Looks like they were using it as a holding area. Temporary confinement before transport. Oof, those words hit like a punch. That room, faded black storage stenciled across the door. One we'd passed without thinking 100 times. And all that time, people were behind it. Sarah, others, waiting, terrified while we wandered around above them with flashlights and cameras like idiots playing explorers. Now, the preliminary hearings start next week, Sullivan continued. I'll email the dates. It'll be simple. You tell the court what you saw. The defense might try to play the trespassing angle, make it seem like you're unreliable, but the physical evidence backs everything you and William reported. Hey, will Sarah testify? I asked. She will, by video link. She's identified one of the men we arrested. Her description of where she was held lines up exactly with what we found. When the call ended, I just sat there, staring at my phone while my cereal dissolved into sludge. It didn't matter. None of it mattered except the fact she was alive. Alive after 3 weeks in hell. The weight didn't lift. It shifted. 7 more victims, 7 people who'd been dragged through that system while we were upstairs chasing the ghost stories of an abandoned hospital. I called William. Explained everything. Sarah, the arrests, the safe houses, the tunnels. He didn't speak for almost a minute. 7 other victims, he said finally. 7 people we maybe could have helped if we'd found that tunnel earlier. I felt that same guilt gnawing at me again, but I repeated what Sullivan had said, that the whole operation was designed to be invisible, deliberately buried under concrete shadows and fear. Even the professionals hadn't seen it for 2 years. We never stood a chance of finding it sooner. But at least we'd found it now. I keep replaying all those trips into the basement, William muttering the same thing on the phone, like he was trying to scrape the guilt out of his own head. All those times, walking right past that storage room, never even looking behind the junk piled against the wall. Hey, we weren't hunting for secret tunnels, I told him. We were taking photos, cataloguing the architecture, that's all. But after we hung up, normal life felt like a sick joke. I tried to wash dishes, answer emails, make a to-do list, anything to feel grounded. It didn't work. My brain kept circling back to Sullivan's update like a predator coming back to the kill. 3 arrests, Sarah alive, barely. 7 more victims identified. A trafficking pipeline bigger and older than anything we'd imagined. And at the heart of it all sat the hospital, a building that had been our second home, our quiet escape, our museum of rot and forgotten rooms. Now the crime scene of one of the biggest trafficking cases Detroit had ever seen. The basement we'd wandered through dozens of times had been a holding pen for human beings, people suffering just a few feet beneath where we stood adjusting camera settings and joking about peeling paint. Urban exploration would never be the same. From now on, every abandoned place would feel like a potential trapdoor into something darker than rust and dust. What we thought of as a hobby, about a forgotten history, had yanked us face first into a very real, very current nightmare. Still, Sullivan's words echoed through the guilt. You ended their operation. Without stumbling into that tunnel and calling it in, Sarah and the others might have vanished forever. The guilt of not finding it sooner was still there, but now it sat alongside something else. The knowledge that we'd actually made a dent in something monstrous. And now we were paying the price. The hearings meant reliving that night, detail by detail, in front of lawyers and judges who would weaponize our memories. William and I weren't just explorers anymore. We were key witnesses in a federal case, all because of a scraping sound in the dark. 3 weeks later, I stood at the courthouse steps, tightening my tie for the 3rd damn time. That place towered over me. Columns, stonework, everything built to remind you how small you were compared to the system inside. William was waiting in the lobby, looking like someone had forced him into the only dress shirt he owned. He clutched the folder Sullivan told us to bring. His knuckles were white and his eyes were darting like he expected someone to drag him back outside. And to be honest, he looked exactly how I felt. The courthouse felt like a hive ready to sting. Expensive suited lawyers marched around with folders like weapons. Families of defendants clung to each other, and court techs pushed heavy cases on rattling wheels from one room to the next. Everyone moved with a sense of purpose, as if they'd memorized the rules of this battlefield before they walked in. Everyone, that is, except us. Detective Sullivan spotted us lingering by the metal detectors, looking like we'd wandered into the wrong war. She steered us through security, her badge clearing the way, her voice cool and clipped. We were the prosecution's main play, she said, the ones who could stitch together the timeline, who'd heard and seen the trafficking operation with our own eyes. Now, the defense would try to tear us apart, make us look clueless or dishonest. But the shed and everything inside it had already spoken for us. Just say what you saw, what you heard. Nothing else, no guesses, no stories. The prosecutors would lead us like we were stepping through a minefield, one careful step at a time. We rode the elevator to the 4th floor. The doors opened into a courtroom smaller than I'd imagined. Wood paneling like an old church and benches lined up in rows like a congregation waiting to judge us. The defendants sat near the front in orange jumpsuits, chained at the ankles. 3 of them, shackled, but real. 2 I recognized instantly. The older man with the commanding voice, and one of the young guys who'd hauled Sarah into the shed like she was the cargo. My stomach twisted. And they weren't towering over anyone now. They looked shrunken, swallowed up by fluorescent lights and polished wood instead of standing in the dark over a limp body. When the prosecutor called my name, the courtroom seemed to stretch, the short walk to the witness stand becoming a slow march. The bailiff muttered the oath. I pressed one hand on the Bible. God, it felt heavier than I'd expected, like the truth itself had weight. Part 5. The prosecutor, grey streaks in her hair, no nonsense in her tone, started with the basics: who I was, how long I'd been doing urban exploration, how many nights William and I had prowled abandoned buildings like Ypsilanti Estate, what dragged us there that night. Then she peeled away the layers, asking for each detail like she already knew the answers. Told her about the route we took through the hospital, the noise in the basement, the trapdoor buried under debris, crawling the tunnel inch by inch, climbing into that shed full of camping gear, surveillance monitors, radio equipment, a little bunker built for watching and waiting. "What happened when you heard voices coming toward the shed?" she asked. "We backed down through the trapdoor," I said. "Left it cracked just enough to see. 4 men walked in and started talking like they owned the darkness. They talked about the hospital, about watching it. And then they mentioned us, 2 kids who'd walked in around 9, exactly the time William and I had stepped foot inside. Although their voices reached us, we knew we weren't just exploring anymore. We were trespassing on someone else's secret, and they were already watching." They asked the men if they talked about any plans. Yes, very specific ones, routes through Detroit, maps spread across a table like they were planning a job. One guy brought up a pickup on Cass Avenue at 6 in the morning. They had a 1-hour window, he said, before the streets started filling with commuters. Whatever they were moving, they wanted it quiet and fast, and before anyone was awake enough to notice. They weren't just hanging around that shed, they were sinking clocks. The prosecutor pressed on, asked me what happened when the vehicle finally showed up. That was the part I didn't like saying out loud. Not because I hadn't told it to Detective Sullivan a dozen times already. Not because I hadn't replayed it in my head every night since. It was just different under the lights, with the whole room listening. 2 more men walked into the shed, hauling a young woman between them like she weighed nothing. She was limp, barely alive, or drugged so deeply it didn't matter. Her wrists were cinched behind her with zip ties. The prosecutor asked about her condition. I told her. The girl couldn't stand. Her head had swung forward like her neck couldn't hold it. Her feet scraped the floor, her toes dragging. Her clothes were ripped and dirty. When she tried to raise her voice, her eyes swam, unfocused, like her brain was trapped somewhere behind glass. I told the court how the men talked about buyers and delivery times, drop-offs. How one made a call to confirm transportation for the next morning. How someone jabbed a needle into her arm, and that last bit of life inside her shut off like a switch. All the while, I stared straight at the prosecutor. I didn't look at the defendants, but I felt them. 3 shapes behind me, watching like they still had power. Then the defense lawyer came at me exactly the way Sullivan had warned me he would. He circled around our trespassing like it was the real crime here. 20 minutes of trying to paint us as thrill-seeking criminals. Why were we crawling into abandoned buildings? Why should anyone believe people who broke the law for fun? Were we drunk? High? Did we actually hear what we thought we'd heard from inside a hidden tunnel? Wasn't it true that William and I regularly engage in illegal activities? Look, we explore abandoned places, I said. We don't smash windows or take anything. So we do enter without permission, he said. Yes, and that night we were trespassing. Yes, I glanced at the prosecutor then. She nodded once, but what we saw wasn't graffiti or old medical files. No, we watched a woman get trafficked. The judge cut the defense off a few times, sustaining objections like swatting at flies. After half an hour of trying to make the trespass sound worse than kidnapping, the attorney finally shut his binder and sat down. The prosecutor asked a couple of quick follow-ups to straighten out the timeline. Then I was dismissed. William went up next. He backed up everything I said and added even more. Details about the surveillance setup, the way the cameras were pointed, how the feed covered every inch of that hospital. He made it all sound undeniable, like a system built for hunting people. The defense lawyer tried to chew William up the same way he'd tried with me, hammering on the fact that we'd broken into the hospital instead of touching the truth spilling out of his testimony. It was like he'd decided that arguing over a busted lock was safer than facing what we'd seen in that shed. But the room changed when Sarah Thompson appeared on the screen. They rolled in a big monitor, set it so the whole courtroom had to look her in the eye, and her voice came out through the speakers like it was floating over us. She looked better than when we'd found her. No zip ties, no blank stare, but she still had this fragile weight to her, like one wrong word could break her all over again. The silence in the courtroom wasn't polite. It was heavy, like everyone was afraid to breathe too loudly. Sarah pointed out the older defendant without hesitation, naming him as the one who oversaw her captivity, who controlled her like cargo. Oh, she laid it all out. 2 days locked in a basement room at the hospital, no windows, barely any food, then moved through the tunnels like contraband. She described it with a clarity no investigator could invent, details only someone living the nightmare would know. Her words fit the evidence like a key snapping into a lock. "He told me they were taking me to Toledo," she said, her voice steady and calm. "He said if I didn't cooperate, things would get much worse." You could feel every person in the room wanting to look away from the defendants, but not daring to. The defense barely touched her with questions. They didn't want to look like the kind of people who bullied a trafficking victim on live video in front of a judge. When her feed cut off, the silence stuck around for a few seconds, like the courtroom needed to absorb what it had just heard before moving on. Then the judge made it official. All charges would move forward. He didn't just say there was enough evidence, he spelled it out. William's and my testimony was admissible, despite trespassing, because what we walked in on outweighed any property crime. Our illegal entry didn't matter next to the fact that people were being trafficked like packages. We saw it, we reported it, and it led to victims being pulled out alive and a criminal network getting torn apart. We stepped out into the hallway, still wired from the hearing, when Detective Sullivan found us. She had a different look to her this time, like she'd finally crushed something she'd been chasing for a long time. She told us the ruling meant every detail we uncovered could be used at trial, and that what we testified today nailed down the timeline and intent they needed. Then she dropped the last piece. The case wasn't just big anymore. It had blown open, bigger than anyone expected. Someone thought they were running a business. Now the whole operation was about to burn. Evidence poured out of that shed hadn't just wrapped up 3 guys in orange jumpsuits. It had blown open a whole machine. Federal agents traced documents, phone logs, and surveillance gear to trafficking routes spread out like veins across 7 states. They started kicking in doors. 12 more arrests, more victims poured out of basements, storage units, and trashed buildings no one bothered to care about. Sullivan said the hospital tunnel was only one small doorway in a network built on shadows. They'd been running bodies across the Midwest for more than 3 years, using abandoned places like waste stations for human cargo. William and I had gone looking for peeling paint and forgotten architecture. Instead, we'd stumbled into something Sullivan called one of the biggest trafficking busts the region had ever seen. We weren't explorers anymore. We had crossed a line without knowing it. "Yeah, how many victims total?" William asked. "So far, 15 we can name," Sullivan said. "We're still finding more. Every new location turns up another lead, another person to pull out." We walked with her toward the courthouse doors. Before we stopped outside, Sullivan mentioned that Sarah Thompson was expected to fully recover, not just her body, but her mind too. She was already working with federal victim services. She planned to testify at the real trial when it came down later in the year. "She asked me to thank you both," Sullivan said. "She knows you two are the reason she's alive." Outside, William and I just stood there on the courthouse steps, saying nothing at first. Cars rolled past like any normal afternoon. People hurried by with phones in their hands and coffee cups, chasing meetings, errands, whatever filled their day. The city looked unchanged, steady and indifferent, as if nothing monumental had just happened. But something had shifted in me, quiet, heavy, and irreversible. For 2 years, urban exploration had been a game for me, a way to wander through Detroit's forgotten bones and admire what had been left behind. We studied rusting stairwells, collapsed ceilings, old machines waiting for a purpose that would never return. We read history in dust and cracked tiles. We were just passing through someone else's past. We didn't expect to find the present staring back, though, and bleeding. Standing on the courthouse steps, I realized abandoned buildings weren't just ghost stories made of brick and dust. They could hide living monsters, operations still running, pain still occurring, people being moved and sold in the dark. They weren't always tombs of history. Sometimes they were crime scenes still breathing. The hobby that had pulled William and me together suddenly felt sharper and heavier. From now on, a shattered window or a rotted hallway wouldn't just mean a forgotten architectural piece. It might mean something ugly was happening just out of sight. Every hidden passage would feel like a question. What's really behind this? And still, I knew I would keep exploring. Curiosity doesn't just go away because it bites back. What happened in that shed taught me something I couldn't unlearn. Paying attention mattered. It could expose more than peeling paint and rusted tools. It could drag something wicked into the light. William asked if I wanted lunch before heading home. I said yeah. We left the courthouse behind us, walking toward a diner we'd noticed earlier. I imagined the conversation ahead. Faces of the defendants, how long the trial might take, what Sarah might say when she testified in person. Normal talk about something that wasn't normal at all. As we walked, I knew exploration would still be a part of my life, but not in the same way. Abandoned places weren't just stories etched in architecture anymore. They were secrets, some harmless, some dangerous, some screaming for someone to find them. Curiosity came with a weight now, a responsibility to see past the decay. Oh, the men in orange would get their trial. Sarah and the others would heal, piece by piece, with some people finally fighting for them instead of against them. The tunnels under Ypsilanti State would be sealed shut, buried for good, and eventually William and I would go back to the forgotten corners of the city. But we wouldn't be tourists anymore. We'd walk into the dark knowing that sometimes history isn't dead. It's just trapped, waiting to be found. Well, you know what? I bet you weren't expecting the story to go that way, were you? It didn't start out like that. I thought we were going to be in for some creepy, supernatural, paranormal stuff underneath the hospital, and, well, turned out quite different, and there was a happy ending, which is always a joy. Hope you enjoyed that one. Thoughts, feelings, anything else in the comments section below the video. And as ever, I will do my best to join in the conversation. Thanks to the author, Margot Holloway, as ever. Really loved that one. And like I said, it's just nice to have a happy ending sometimes, isn't it? Well, that's it. Read that one in the space of about 2 hours. Okay, and as always, brain not work so good after all that. So thanks for listening, and I'll be back again very soon. Till the next time, my dear friends, you sleep well, yeah? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.